Hello guys, this is Trinity Storm here and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do first part of what if Naruto was one of the original Avengers. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Also, don't forget to follow me on my other social media handles. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
The war was over, and the final enemy had been defeated, but the cost had been high. Thousands of people were killed, and entire villages were burned down and destroyed. Everyone had paid a price for a madman's dreams, but some had paid more than others. A young man's badly injured body lay in the center of a battlefield. His golden hair was only partially visible due to the amount of blood that was currently covering it. It wasn't until a lone figure arrived and rolled him over that you could see almost half of his head was missing. "No!" screamed the figure, doing everything she could to save the man she loved's life. "You can't abandon me now, Naruto." A figure was frantically working inside what was left of the young man's mind to save his host. Normally, the figure could heal his host from almost any injury, but their final battle had exhausted even his vast reserves of chakra. They were dying, as frustrating as it was, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. He could only keep the boy's heart beating and blood regenerating through sheer willpower, but even that would fail eventually. There was a chance, but it would require a sacrifice, and the fox was afraid of what it would cost him. "Naruto!" yelled Kurama as he watched the sewers collapse around him. "We can't go out like this." They had defeated their greatest foe, but the final attack had completely destroyed Naruto's right side of his head. Kurama could repair the physical injuries, but the massive amounts of chakra required to do so, while keeping Naruto alive with so much of his brain missing, would necessitate Kurama sacrificing part of himself. The chakra from which he was created could be used to heal his host, but he would never regain it and would be diminished as a result of the sacrifice. Was he truly willing to sacrifice so much of himself for the young man? They'd been adversaries, reluctant allies, and finally partners and friends. Kurama had not respected anyone more than his host since the Sage of the Six Paths. So, yes, he would make the sacrifice if it meant keeping Naruto Uzumaki alive, but there were some issues to work out. The first issue, and possibly the simplest, would be ensuring that Naruto returned as the same person he was before. Kurama could do it. All he had to do was use his own memories of Naruto's life to reconstruct the child's memories. However, this brought up the second issue. Naruto had been through some traumatic events in recent months, and Kurama was afraid that his own memories of the events would change Naruto for the worse. He reasoned that it might be best if Naruto didn't remember those things right away. Naruto could always learn about them later, from people who could explain it better than a jaded old fox who admittedly couldn't care less half the time. Yes, Naruto should forget those things for the time being. A head injury was a perfect excuse for not remembering a few months of your life. The third, and possibly most serious, issue was that using so much of his chakra to save Naruto was bound to cause some serious problems for the young man. Not only would Naruto never be normal again, but he would be more than human after this was all over, possibly becoming a half-demon or something completely different. Not to mention that Kurama could detect several strange seals throughout the surrounding area, and while he couldn't see them, he could tell they were still active. He had no idea what would happen if they were exposed to his chakra in such large quantities. "Not that it matters," grumbled the fox. "Either I do it or we both die. There isn't much of a choice." A young woman worked frantically outside of Naruto's mind to save the young man from death. She'd been pushing her chakra into his head wound for a while, grateful that his heart was still beating, but she was exhausted and time was running out. She was losing him, the man she loved, and she couldn't bear the thought of life without him. Looking around, she realized there was no other living being nearby, no one she could turn to for assistance. She decided that it was better to die with her love than to live without him as the last of her usable chakra faded, leaving her on the verge of passing out. So, gently laying his head in her lap, she pulled a kunai from her thigh pouch and prepared to die alongside Naruto. She was holding the tip of the blade over her heart, waiting for the moment his breathing stopped so they could travel together, when Naruto's hand shot up and pulled the blade away from her chest. "Please, don't do that," said a deep, malevolent voice that made her shudder as she watched Naruto's remaining eye open to reveal that it was red and slitted like a cat's. "He's not going to be happy when he wakes up if you do that." "Kyuubi?" the young woman asked, terrified that the demon had finally seized control of the man she loved. "Please do not take him from me." "I don't intend to, girl," the fox replied through Naruto's lips. "In fact, I'm going to do everything I can to get him back." "Why?" Kyuubi appeared to pause for a moment before responding. "Only two people have I ever respected. Naruto and one other character. It was beyond my ability to save the other, but it is within my power to save the kid. So I'll do it." "And what do you get out of it?" she wondered, fearful of the cost of Naruto's life. "Nothing," the fox replied as his chakra began to leak from Naruto's wounds. "In fact, I'm the one who has to pay the price for this. When this is all said and done, I'll be a shadow of my former self, while he'll be something more than he was before. I can't change the fact that he'll still be him, but he'll look different." She was now concerned and inquired, "How are you going to change him? Have you not done enough for him?" "I wanted to be free," the beast replied, his temper flaring. "Was it really so much to ask to be free and to live my life as I saw fit rather than to be imprisoned? Can you honestly say you would not have fought your jailer if you were in my situation?" She nodded, her head bowed, hating what her answer had to be. "I would have retaliated." "Then you'll understand that what I'm doing now is completely voluntary, sacrificing a part of myself to give Naruto back what I've taken from him in the past," the fox said, closing Naruto's eye. "Let me do what I need to do now. I recommend you get as far away from here as possible because being close to this will be dangerous. Will you promise to return him to me?" Kyuubi opened his eyes again and looked up at the lovely young lady. "I promise not to give up, just as he would not. Now I ask you to make a promise. If I fail, you will not surrender either. You will live your life and be happy because, even if I fail, he will keep an eye on you and wait for you after you have lived a long and happy life. For his sake, promise me this." "I promise," she said quietly, leaning down and kissing Naruto's bloody cheek before slipping out from under him and running. "Don't ever give up." She then turned and fled. She ran as fast as she could, which was not as fast as usual because she had already expended all of her chakra. It was a constant battle to keep her legs moving until she couldn't fight any longer and stumbled to the ground. Looking back, she was surprised at how far she had come, nearly 500 yards if her guess was correct. She hoped it was far enough, but as the darkness engulfed her and she fell unconscious, she prayed to Kami above to return her love to her. Anyone watching from afar would have noticed the sudden appearance of a ball of red demonic chakra around Naruto Uzumaki's body. They would have also seen 7 seals glow white and form a second shroud around Naruto's body. The blinding white light lasted several minutes before dissipating, leaving nothing behind. Naruto, as well as a large portion of the ground around him, had vanished. All that remained was a crater about 100 yards across and 50 yards deep, but no trace of Naruto could be found. A young woman slept several hundred yards away from the crater. She would not wake up for a full day, but she would dream. She imagined a boy with sapphire blue eyes and golden hair laughing and smiling in a world other than theirs. He was a hero in that world, just as he was in this one. He'd find comrades to fight alongside him and a woman to love who saw him for who he truly was. In his dream, he fought against terrifying armies and lone lunatics, but he always fought to protect those he held dear. The dream gradually showed him coming to value the entire world. The one thing it never showed her was the young man giving up. When she awoke the next day, she discovered Naruto's crater and wept for what might have been, but she remembered her promise. She returned to their village with the news of Naruto's victory over his enemies, telling everyone that he had died so that they could all live. Some took it harder than others, but everyone felt the world was colder and darker without Naruto to brighten it. She told everyone who asked about Kyuubi's attempt to save him and how it had failed, ensuring that everyone understood that in the end, the so-called monster had laid down its life in order to return Naruto to them. Several weeks later, while sorting through Naruto's belongings, several young women discovered the toad summoning contract hidden under his bed. They took it to the new Hokage and inquired as to what would be done with it. The Hokage decided that a new toad summoner should be chosen for the sake of the village's security. The decision was met with some heated debate at first, but a young genin was eventually chosen. He was the last of his class, which reminded many people of the previous two summoners, but he showed remarkable potential. When the Hokage opened the scroll to allow the boy to sign, several people present gasped at what they saw. Naruto's name, which should have turned black upon his death, remained red, albeit faded. The boy who had been chosen to sign the contract was urged to hurry up and do so that they could ask the toads what this meant. It took weeks for the boy to summon anything other than a tadpole, but when he did, the Hokage immediately requested that the small toad carry a message back to Mount Myoboku indicating that they needed to speak with one of the elder toads. It took some time and a lot of candy, but the elders were eventually summoned. They initially refused to speak, insisting that their new summoner be tested first, which he thankfully passed, before they revealed what they knew. What they had to say would both shock and inspire others. "The boy is not dead," Pa said, smiling. "We can't get to him because he's too far away, but he's still alive. I have no idea where he is because it is beyond our reach. Even so, if I know him, he's still fighting the good fight. Can you bring him back?" The Hokage and several other people asked at the same time. Pa simply frowned and shook his head. "No, we can't reach him any longer. Don't worry about the boy. According to the great Toad Sage, he is where he needs to be and his time here is up." That night, a young woman sat on her home's roof, smiling as she gazed up at the stars. Although she was heartbroken that she would never see him again, she was relieved that Naruto was still alive somewhere out there. She could only hope that he was happy and living a good life wherever he was. She dreamed of Naruto and his adventures as she fell asleep under the stars that night. She smiled as she watched him grow into the man she always knew he could be, knowing he would never give up. She also kept her promise of never giving up. This was not how Naruto had envisioned his life unfolding. He had not anticipated finding himself in this situation. If this was the afterlife, he was very disappointed because there was no never-ending supply of ramen and no sign of any of the people he had lost and hoped to see again someday. It made sense that this was the afterlife. He remembered they were at war and figured he could have died fighting, though that was a little too tame for his tastes. To be honest, he had hoped he would die of dehydration after a week-long sex marathon with Sakura, Hinata, and Shion. Unfortunately, that had never happened, and Naruto was now in a strange place that was nothing like his home. Nothing felt right, not the sounds, sights, or smells. Everything appeared to have taken a detour in terms of reality shortly after he and his partner Kurama, better known as Kyuubi, teamed up to fight the last fight. The details were hazy. In fact, much of the last few years were hazy or simply missing. Naruto had awoken in the middle of a large wooded area, but it was a strange forest given that he could hear machines in the distance and everything appeared a little too neat to be natural. Naruto was surprised to find himself in the middle of the largest village he had ever seen after taking to the trees and climbing as high as he could. A megacure seemed small in comparison, with buildings reaching so high into the sky that one or two of them appeared to be touching the clouds. It amazed him that anyone could construct something so massive. The smell was another thing that drove him insane. The air was thick, almost oily, and left an aftertaste in his mouth that tasted like a combination of burning rubber and sewage. You could almost see the air around you, which was thick with smoke and steam, not to mention the strong odor of people. Oh, there were people. He could hear them from where he was, which was about 200 yards from the nearest paved road. It was enough to give him a headache, not to mention that for the first time in his life, the thought of ramen did not appeal to him. It just turned his stomach like the bad milk he kept in his fridge. Naruto had been hiding out in the strange forest for a week, trying to figure out what was going on, when he remembered the secret behind training with his clones. Naruto had been having trouble remembering what had happened to him over the last few years since waking up here. Everything was clear to him until he returned to Konoha after his training trip with Jiraiya, after which there were larger and larger voids in his memory that he couldn't explain. Except for ghost stories and Sakura at that time of the month, not much scared Naruto, but the thought of losing his memory terrified him. He discovered his journal while leafing through his travel scroll. Jiraiya had told him the day before they left for the 3-year training trip that everyone should keep a journal, then handed Naruto a leather-bound orange book with only blank pages. He had written down his thoughts about the day and a summary of what he had learned every night for the next 3 years. He had continued the practice after his return to Konoha because it seemed to give him a way to focus his mind and thoughts, giving him some measure of peace. So, sitting in a strange artificial wood, Naruto read about his own life for the past several years. He laughed and cried as memories returned to him, at least more so than before. Only once did he consider burning the journal because he was afraid to read it anymore, and that was after learning that his mentor and godfather had died. He cried that night, probably for the first time since he was a small child. He made a promise to himself the next morning not to forget Jiraiya and to do everything in his power to make the man's dream of peace come true. Naruto finished reading his journal, grateful that he had written so thoroughly about his training and the lessons he had learned over the years. He tucked the journal away and began making plans for what to do next. He needed to learn about where he was and what was going on because information was crucial. Naruto spent the next few days training in secret at night, only sending clones out to learn what they could about where he was. During that time, he discovered that this was a much rougher and less polite place than he had previously encountered. 5 of the 50 clones he sent out to reconnoiter were shot, 2 were stabbed, 3 were almost robbed by bandits, and 10 were groped by both men and women. To say the least, it was frightening. Fortunately, the second batch of clones fared better, and he was learning how to behave in this world. The clones had discovered an area where the people spoke a variation of one of the languages Naruto had learned during his training trip with Jiraiya not far from his current location. Over the next week, Naruto was able to learn the new language and begin gathering information about what the hell was going on thanks to his clones. It was difficult at first, dividing his time between training himself and having clones designed to look like his friends and people he met on his journeys learn the new language. He eventually felt comfortable enough to venture out of the woods and into this new world on his own. Naruto began his new journey using henge to disguise himself once more. Naruto was discovered to be in the city of New York, in the state of New York, in the country of the United States of America. He nearly shitted himself when he got his hands on a map of the area. The city alone was larger than the Fire Country, and on a larger map of the country, you could fit all of the known elemental countries on the eastern seacoast of the United States of America. The scale was far beyond anything Naruto had ever encountered. When he discovered that people needed machines to get from place to place in a reasonable amount of time, he realized that this could not be his world. Several attempts to contact Kurama for assistance had failed. It wasn't until he finally entered his mindscape that he realized why. The fox, or what remained of it, had shrunk to the size of a puppy and was so sound asleep that even screaming in Kurama's ear had failed to wake him. The pipes that represented his and Kurama's chakra were another significant difference. They used to be big, maybe as big as his waist, but now they were huge. The smallest one he found was wider than he was tall, and the rest were bigger than the biggest tree trunks he'd ever seen. That he could have that much chakra in his system was insane, but the proof was right in front of him. To add to the confusion, he now had 2 sets of pipes, one green and one white. He assumed the green ones represented nature chakra and the white ones represented his and Kurama's combined chakras, but that was just a theory until the fox awoke and explained it to him. It took another 2 weeks for Naruto to realize that he was unprepared to survive in this new world. The cold hard truth was that, Unlike in his own world, he would need money and identification papers to function in this new land. Money wasn't an issue for him because he had about 500 gold ryo in his wallet, his trusty Gama-kun, and another 10,000 hidden in a seal on the back of his headband. A little research, not the perverted kind, had revealed that pure gold was worth a lot here in this land, which was going to benefit him. A trip to a pawn shop, and the loss of 20 ryo had netted him nearly 4,000 American dollars, barely half the value of the items, but he couldn't be picky when he was trying to keep a low profile. Fortunately, he had taken to the roofs immediately after leaving the shop, as the owner had sent 2 thugs after him, clearly with the intent of reclaiming the rest of Naruto's coins and the man's money. Unfortunately for them, he had already left by the time they noticed the roof above them. Naruto was confident he could have handled them in a straight fight, but that would have drawn unwanted attention, so it was better to run and hide for the time being. Because he was still living in the trees of Central Park, or the forest in the middle of the city, Naruto only spent his money on necessities like takeout food and toiletries. Oh, how he yearned for toilet paper and toothpaste. Don't even get him started on bath and laundry soap. The discovery of a laundromat was still high on his thank Kami list. He met his current employer one night while he was doing laundry. Mr. Sasaki ran a small Japanese restaurant near the park and was desperate for a delivery boy. Given that Japanese was a dead ringer for Naruto's native tongue, and that the old man was willing to pay him in cash for his services, the young shinobi thought he was in luck. By the next afternoon, he was riding around Manhattan on a beat-up scooter, delivering food to offices and apartment buildings. This was advantageous because Naruto's first delivery was to a library. Not just any library, but the largest damned library he'd ever seen. He was living in an empty room in the place by that night, and his clones had been reading everything they could get their hands on all day, each hanged into a random person Naruto saw around the city. Jiraiya had told him that knowledge was power, and Naruto took this as a sign from Kami above that it was time to put that advice into action. He read everything he could get his hands on, which went against his nature, but you didn't always get what you wanted. Naruto read everything from literary masterpieces to crappy tabloids. The history of the world? He had it memorized. Scientific treatises on the most occult theories? He absorbed them. He read the entire contents of the library, including several rare books stored away from public view, in 2 months and with more clones than there were people in the city. What he discovered was both wondrous and heartbreaking, but it was all worthwhile in the end because he now knew what he needed to do if he was to survive in this world. The first step was to establish a background for himself and obtain identity documents. That wouldn't be so difficult if he could cash in a few more ryo and find the right people. It took him another month to make the necessary contacts. Finding the right people was simple because, just like in his world, the underworld figures he required were always easy to come by if you knew where to look. Naruto traded money and favors for the paperwork he required, once again grateful for Jiraiya's training. He wasn't thrilled about working for crime lords, but with the proper application of skill and henge, he was able to escape with his morals intact and even save the lives of a few innocent people. Finally, Naruto had a set of identification papers that would allow him to rent an apartment rather than living in a dusty old attic. That's how he met her. He'd just rented a reasonably nice studio apartment in the Bronx and was about to move in when he was hit by a black and orange blur with long blonde hair and blue eyes. All he got out of her that first meeting was a shouted apology as the young woman ran down the street, but something inside him said he should know who the mysterious girl was. He ignored the thought until later that day, when he was inspecting the mailboxes in the entryway. N. Namikaze was the name listed for apartment 4A, which was directly across from his own. Okay, that piqued his interest because it was his father's last name, but it was the little chibi figure next to the name that drew his attention. The tiny female figure with the big smile, pigtails, and waving a peace sign had him wondering what the hell was going on. Naruto climbed the fire escape to the roof that night after finishing setting up his apartment and making some ramen for dinner. He couldn't see the stars as clearly as he could in Konoha, but it was peaceful up on the roof, and that had to count for something. He had just finished his ramen when he heard the stairwell access door open. Naruto dashed for a shadowy corner, unsure if he was allowed up on the roof, and waited to see who was coming. It was the same girl who had run him over earlier in the day, much to his surprise. Even more surprising was the fact that he recognized her. He recognized her because he had seen her up close and personal on numerous occasions. There, the illusion materialized, was a woman who embodied his first original jutsu, the sexy no jutsu. She stood about his height, with long blonde hair tied back in two pigtails that hung down to her waist. Her eyes were a perfect match for his sapphire blue eyes, though hers appeared much larger. Her face was soft and heart-shaped, whereas his was harsh and squared off. She was slim and shapely where he was broad-shouldered and muscular. She was very shapely, especially considering the tight black bicycle shorts and skin-tight t-shirt she was wearing. If he hadn't noticed the hem of her shirt moving up and down as she walked closer to the center of the roof, he would have assumed the entire outfit was painted on. It was just strange to see a female version of himself walking around who wasn't one of his clones. He watched her for a few minutes as she sat on one of the brick half-walls, gazing up at the sky and sighing heavily. He was about to flee when she started talking. Even with his enhanced senses, he couldn't hear her at first, but she gradually became more audible. He was startled when she began talking to someone, but he quickly realized what was going on. She was talking to her parents, who had apparently been dead for a long time. Something else they appeared to have in common. "Well, I got fired again," she said quietly enough for Naruto to hear. "This afternoon, my boss got a little grabby and decided the best place for his hands to be was on my $1. I wasn't going to stand for it, so I bolted and punched him in the nose. As I tossed my order pad at him and headed for my locker, I broke the damn thing and had him crying like a little bitch on the ground. He was screaming by the time I was dressed and on my way out the door that I had been fired and would never work for him again. I'm not sure, I thought he figured out I quit, but fired is just as effective. It appears that I will be returning to the unemployment office. Guys, I hope you're not too disappointed in me." As she returned her gaze to the sky, she appeared to be thinking of something. "Oh, and I need to track down the guy the first knocked over this morning. I'm sorry, but I was running late and could only apologize as I ran down the street. I didn't get a good look at him, but he seemed familiar and cute. I swear I only saw his back for a second, but he has the broadest shoulders I've ever seen." Talk about scorching. When Naruto heard that, he blushed and decided it would be a good idea to make himself scarce before hearing anything that would embarrass him. Naruto was never a firm believer in kami, fate, or anything like that, and what happened next could have been their way of saying, "Yes, we do exist." He was about to leap off the side of the building and return to his apartment through the front door when his foot slipped on something and he ended up face first on the roof. The shriek that followed his slip was followed by the sound of someone diving behind something a split second later. When Naruto looked up, he noticed two pigtails protruding from the top of the wall the girl had been sitting on a moment before. "You know, I can see you," he chuckled as he sat up. "I'm sorry if I scared you. I had just moved in and wasn't sure if we were allowed up here, so I hid when I heard you come up. I didn't want to interrupt your private moment, so I was just going to leave and let you have your privacy. Unfortunately, my feet decided I needed to rest and forgot to tell my head. Sorry." This all came out of his mouth in one long exhalation as he sat up and rubbed the back of his head, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Basically, I'm an idiot and I apologize. I'll go." "Wait," she said as he stood up and turned to walk away. "What is your name?" Naruto replied, turning around with a look of embarrassment. "Sorry, I forgot the manners my ba-chan taught me. Naruto is my name. Uzumaki Naruto. As I previously stated, I have only recently moved in. I believe we met this morning, though you were in a hurry at the time." The young lady finally raised her head to peer over the half wall, allowing Naruto a better look at her. He noticed her pigtails were set above and behind her ears, giving her a youthful and innocent appearance. He also noticed that her bangs hung down, nearly completely covering her eyes, giving him the impression that she was hiding behind them. She had a cute little nose that almost begged to be kissed on the tip. She wore a small frown on her full lips, which were a natural dark pink, as Naruto noticed. Overall, she was the most stunning woman he had ever seen. When he used the sexy no jutsu, which was the only thing keeping him from falling in love with her right then and there, a part of his mind reminded him that she was a dead ringer for himself. "I'm really sorry," she said, her voice sounding like something an angel would envy. "I was running behind schedule. I didn't mean to knock you down." "Hey, I've been late a dozen times before, so no worries," Naruto responded quickly, wondering why his cheeks felt warm when she smiled at him. "Why don't we start over? What happened to this morning and tonight?" With a warm smile on his face, Naruto walked over to the young woman and out into the moonlight. "As previously stated, my name is Naruto, and I currently reside here. What is your given name?" When she saw him, the young woman gasped, her cheeks turning darker in the moonlight as she stood up and took Naruto's hand. "This is going to sound strange, but we almost have the same name. Naruto is my name. Naruto Namikaze, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Namikaze?" he asked, his face flushed at the sound of the name. "Namikaze was my father's surname." Naruto expressed her surprise at the news, saying, "I thought it was just a fictitious name? Do you mean a real family? Do you believe we're related?" Probably not, because I believe my father's family came from a remote village in Japan," Naruto replied, once again wondering if she was a female version of him in this world. "But we can still be friends, so that has to count for something, right?" That night, they talked for several hours on the roof. They shared bits and pieces of their lives, surprised at how much they shared, and while Naruto couldn't tell her everything about his life, he could tell her some of it. As it turned out, they were both orphans, just as he had suspected. Shinji and Orihime Namikaze, Naruto's parents, were murdered when she was only a year old. Naruto's family had been living in Hawaii since shortly before her birth, and they had decided to take a vacation in New York shortly after her first birthday. Unfortunately, both of her parents were killed in a car accident. Naruto was placed in foster care because she had no other blood relatives until she was 16 and eligible to apply for emancipation. She had moved into the apartment she still lived in and finished high school locally because she had money from her parents. She received a scholarship to Long Island University after graduation, where she majored in dance and theater. Unfortunately, despite the fact that she was able to live off campus and save money there, her scholarship had been reduced due to budget constraints, and she was forced to work nights in order to pay her tuition. At the rate she was going, she feared she would have to drop out because her parents' money was about to run out and she would have to work just to afford rent, forget about school. When Naruto began to cry, Naruto hugged her and found her sudden grip around his waist to be tighter than anything Tsunade or Sakura had ever managed. Naruto told her about his past as she calmed down. He explained that he was born and raised in a small Japanese village and had only recently moved to the United States. He told her that he, too, was an orphan, his parents having died in a fire just an hour after he was born. He avoided the gory details of his childhood, instead telling her that he had spent most of his life alone. Naruto laughed as he told her how he never paid attention in school, mainly because he spent so much time pranking people who deserved it, but that as he grew older, he realized he had a talent for learning things faster than others. Finally, he told her how his village had been destroyed by a natural disaster, an earthquake, which had led him here. "I left so quickly that I didn't even know where I was going until I got here," he admitted with a sad smile, knowing he was only telling half the truth. "When I finally got my bearings, I lived off the meager savings I brought with me, but that won't last forever." He really wanted to tell her more, but speaking half-truths and whole lies didn't sit well with him, and telling the truth would have made him sound insane. So he told her about his life in New York since moving there. He told her how Mr. Sasaki and the customers he delivered to had helped him find work and improve his language skills. She remarked that his English sounded almost perfect, with the exception of a few minor details. Then he told her about how he was trying to find his place in the world and how he wanted to help people but didn't know how. Naruto, who hadn't let go of him and was currently snuggling into his chest, admitted that she occasionally considered ways to help people but didn't know what she could do. "I'm just a girl who happens to be good at dancing," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleepiness. "I wish I could do more, but what can I do? It's not like I'm some sort of superhero." Naruto looked down to see Naruto fast asleep in his arms. As he watched her sleep, he smiled. Naruto scooped her up in his arms and carried her bridal style down the fire escape to his window, realizing it was getting late. He moved across his apartment, summoning a clone to open the door, but when he tried the door to her apartment, it was locked. He sent the clone to her window, hoping it was unlocked, but the clone dispelled, revealing that the window was securely locked. Normally, he would have had a clone pick the lock and leave, but he didn't want to freak Naruto out, so the only option he had was for her to spend the night in his apartment. Naruto returned to his room and placed her on his bed, covering her up. He went to his closet and pulled out a spare blanket and pillow he had bought earlier that day before flopping down on his couch. It wasn't the biggest couch in the world, as his feet hung over the end, but it would suffice for the night. His last thought before falling asleep was that for the first time ever, a girl was sleeping in his bed, and he wasn't there to enjoy it. With that thought, he drifted off to sleep and dreamed of Naruto and him walking hand in hand through Konoha's forests. He awoke the next morning to find someone gently poking his shoulder. Naruto liked to cuddle, which wasn't widely known, owing to the fact that the situation had never arisen before. This, combined with years of instincts drilled into him, resulted in him grabbing the offending person, pulling them up tight against him, and then pulling the sheets over them both as he drifted off back to sleep. This lasted about a minute as the person he had just pulled into his arms controlled her blushing before turning her head just enough to whisper in his ear. "If you don't let me go by the time I count to 10, I'll have to stay here all day and never want to leave," said an angel's voice. He mumbled, half asleep, warm. "Now go to bed. Get up later." "Naruto," said the voice once more. "Do you hear me?" "No," he muttered. "Pillow is obnoxious. Pillows are not meant to be loud." The giggle was what drew his mind out of slumber and into the waking world. "Wait a second. Pillows do not speak and do not have heartbeats." "Oh, no." Naruto forced his eyes open and came face to face with Naruto. The fact that she was so close to his face that he could count her eyelashes surprised him. Add to that the devilish grin on her face, not to mention the very pretty blush, and he was pretty sure he was going to get in trouble for this. Oh, he forgot to mention that one of Naruto's very long and shapely legs was now laying across his hips and that his little buddy was awake and standing at attention. Not helping matters was the fact that he had one hand on her thigh and the other wrapped around her waist, which meant her rather ample chest was firmly pressed against his side, exacerbating the current problem with his little buddy. "Please don't kill me," he pleaded, slowly removing his hands from their positions. "For anything I may have done, I plead stupidity and being a rather sound sleeper." "Sorry." "Oh, I don't know," Naruto cooed. "So far, I've really enjoyed it. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Why am I in your home, and how did I end up in your bed?" The fact that she hadn't moved from her current position, in fact, she was now resting her head against his chest, tracing little circles with her fingers, had him completely perplexed. He wrapped his arm around her waist again after a brief moment of thought, though he did not place his other hand on her thigh. Instead, he placed his free hand on top of hers, preventing her from tracing those tiny spirals as she entwined her fingers with his. Once again, that little worried part of his mind warned him that she was a dead ringer for himself as a woman, but he ignored it. "You fell asleep on the roof last night, and when I came down, your door was locked," he explained, enjoying the smell of her hair. "I just put you in my bed and crashed on the couch because you seemed really out of it." I suppose that makes sense, she mused. It's partly my fault because I locked the door before going to the roof. But how were you going to get back in if you locked the door? He wondered. I'm sorry, but you don't have any pockets in those shorts. Naruto laughed, letting go of his hand and sliding her hand down towards his waist. For a brief moment, he believed she was about to do something he wasn't sure he was prepared for, but secretly wished she would. While she did not do what he expected, he did notice her hand move between their hips for a brief moment before she brought it back up and revealed that it now held a single key. His thoughts drifted to where that key had to be based on where she had just pulled it from, and he envied that key. You're right, I don't have pockets in these shorts, she admitted with a chuckle. That's not to say I didn't have somewhere to keep my key. They talked for a few minutes, curled up on his couch and speaking in whispers. Naruto secretly wondered if this was what it was like to have a lover. Quiet moments spent together with no plans to do anything other than be together. He'd never had anything like that before, at least not that he could recall. When he first defeated Kurama, he had a lot of blanks in his memory that seemed to grow larger and larger after meeting his mother. He knew he had won the war, but the specifics, such as who he had fought and how he had won, were a complete blank. So, for all he knew, he had had a similar experience before, but with Naruto by his side, he realized it didn't matter. They eventually said their goodbyes for the day, agreeing to meet again that night. Fortunately, it was still early, so neither of them had to miss work or class. As Naruto walked away, she kissed him on the cheek before closing the door to her apartment, leaving a blushing Naruto in the hallway with a grin that did not fade throughout the day. Sure, there had been the odd woman in his life who teased him, and some, like Shion, were quite direct about what they desired. The problem was that Naruto was clueless at the time, and given how his life had been going in his own world, he probably would have remained so until some young woman beat him over the head and forced him to realize what was going on. Coming here, to this strange new world, had forced him to mature and open his eyes. It was amazing what someone could learn from reading, and Naruto had learned a lot from the vast number of books his clones had read for him. He had learned to be a better person than he had previously been. Most importantly, he'd learned that while women might find his naive to copyright endearing at first, you had to step up and make a move or you'd end up alone. He wasn't the man he wanted to be yet, but he had a chance at a new life, and he wasn't going to waste it by acting like a bumbling idiot. Naruto prepared dinner for them in her apartment that night. It was a cozy little spot that seemed to fit her perfectly, and he loved all the orange she seemed to have all over the place. Only when he saw a picture of her parents, a tall man with sandy brown hair and a shorter woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, did he breathe a sigh of relief, relieved that her parents didn't resemble his. The thought that she might be this world's version of him had been bothering him all day, but now it just seemed like dumb luck with her appearance and name. Add to that she was wearing a form-fitting knee-length black skirt, a tight white blouse with the top 3 buttons undone to reveal a hint of cleavage, black stockings with a seam running up the back, and black high heels when she invited him over. Yeah, he was glad her parents looked nothing like his because the thoughts in his head should never, ever be about someone who could be related to him. Thank you, Cammy, he mumbled as she walked over and handed them a drink, the sway of her hips almost making him drool. That's how things stayed for a while. Naruto and Naruto would spend their nights at each other's apartments cooking and hanging out. They had unspokenly agreed that they had not taken their relationship beyond cuddling and the occasional kiss on the cheek because they both felt the other was the missing piece of them that they had always been looking for. Months passed in this manner, and it was nearly a year before things changed, as they always do. Naruto had tried to get into college, hoping that his forged identity would hold up, but when he saw the type of information they required, he was forced to abandon the idea. As a result, he began to spend more and more time training while Naruto was at school. His clones had never stopped training, but he now spent several hours each day physically training as well. Surprisingly, he didn't have to work very hard to keep his body in top shape because it seemed his body was faster and stronger than it had ever been. In fact, if he had to estimate his current physical condition, he would have to say he was well beyond cage level. Every day, he pushed a little harder, and every day, he was surprised to find that things he had previously struggled with were now quite easy for him. His speed was incredible, far exceeding anything he had ever accomplished. In terms of strength, he kept trying to find his physical limit but had yet to do so. He gave up trying one night after attempting to lift a parked car and finding it to be quite easy, almost too easy. The only thing he noticed was a slight pull on his chakra, almost as if his subconscious mind was channeling chakra to his body without his awareness. He found something to put himself to the test 2 nights later. Because the other delivery guy had quit that afternoon, Naruto was working a double shift. Mr. Sasaki offered Naruto time and a half, plus a bonus for every on-time delivery, in exchange for covering until the old man could hire someone new the following day. Naruto called Naruko after they agreed to explain that he wouldn't be home until late and that she shouldn't stay up late waiting for him. Naruto needed to get his last delivery of the night to a man working at the Apollo Theater as soon as possible because he had a bad feeling. He was about to leave the Apollo when his gut told him he was in big trouble. Sure enough, the biggest and ugliest thing he'd ever seen began wreaking havoc on the place. The creature, which he couldn't call a guy because it barely resembled a human, began attacking anything that moved, including people and cars. Naruto began grabbing people and moving them to safety as quickly as he could. He had to jump in front of cars that were speeding down the street twice. Surprisingly, the cars did no harm to him, except for tearing his clothes in a few places. When something hit the ground behind him, he became enraged. A moment later, another massive creature emerged from the ground and attacked the first. Naruto backed away from that point, not wanting to put himself between the two. Instead, he sped around the area, making sure no one was hurt, unaware that the entire thing was being watched from multiple angles by various government agencies. Naruto was a wreck by the time he got home that night. At the time of writing, he had saved over 200 people from being crushed, burned, or worse. Before going to find the 2 creatures who had caused all the chaos in the first place, he had created about 50 clones to help him contain the damage. It was all over except for the crying when he did find them, so he took to the roofs and hurried home. Naruto called Mr. Sasaki and explained that his scooter had been destroyed, hoping that the old man would not fire him. Fortunately, the entire incident had been broadcast on television, so his boss accepted the story and stated that he would rather Naruto be alive and the scooter be dead than the other way around. Unfortunately, that's when he came in and found Naruko sobbing on his bed. It appeared she had also been watching the news and was aware Naruto was in the vicinity. The fact that his clothes were shredded but he was still alive was enough to convince her, but the kiss she gave him sealed the deal. Naruto began to consider what he wanted from this new life that night, after Naruko had fallen asleep in his arms. So far, he hadn't done much more than learn to ride a scooter and deliver a ridiculous amount of Chinese takeout all over town. It occurred to him that, as he had done in the past, he was squandering an opportunity to be a better person. He had read the entire contents of the New York Public Library, but had he applied what he had learned? No, he had ignored most of it, focusing only on what could be used right away. He was being a jerk once more, and this time he had no one to blame but himself. It was no surprise that people had grown tired of him in his youth. He kept ignoring the fact that he was only as skilled or as weak as he allowed himself to be. He was weak right now because he hadn't used the tools he had at his disposal. He realized he wanted to be more than he had ever been as he gazed at Naruko, mesmerized by her beauty. He aspired to be a good man, not just a young man with promise. "I'm going to get better, Naruko," he said quietly as he closed his eyes and drifted off. "I have a reason to now." Naruko's perspective. Naruko leaned against the door, listening until she heard the door across the hall close, at which point she squealed and began jumping around the room. Not only was Naruto the cutest guy she'd ever met, but he was also incredibly nice. Sure, she'd been startled when she awoke in a strange bedroom, but the fact that she was fully dressed and he was sleeping on the couch rather than in bed with her was a good indication that nothing had happened. Oh, And don't forget the time she tried to wake him up and he drew her into his arms. Those incredible arms, attached to a chest that screamed sexy even while wearing a t-shirt. She hadn't been kidding when she said she would have stayed there all day if she could. She had felt truly safe for the first time in her life. She had been in several foster homes before the age of 18. Some of them were fantastic, while others were less than stellar. The worse it got as she got older, especially if there were already men or boys in the house. She'd lost count of how many times someone from one of her families had tried to put the moves on her. She had basically given up on men, figuring she would either have to start batting for the home team or get used to diner for one for the rest of her life. Then she met Naruto, and everything changed. He had already changed her entire outlook on life in one night and part of a morning. She had, of course, kissed his cheek. "I kissed him," she exclaimed, jumping around the room as she remembered the feel of her lips on his skin. Part of her wanted to return to his house and knock on his door until he answered. Then she'd kiss him for real, which might make her appear a little too eager. Another part of her hoped she'd be the one to knock on her door, with him sweeping her off her feet and kissing her. She blushed at the thought as she grabbed clean clothes and made her way to the restroom. Naruto was certain she would require an extra long shower today. When she left for class an hour later, she considered knocking on Naruto's door, but she restrained herself and went to class. That didn't mean she couldn't think of anything else while attending classes and later looking for a new job. She didn't get a job, but she was able to go grocery shopping and decided to head home and make dinner for them. Naruto was a decent cook, having been required to do so for her various foster families, so that wasn't an issue. However, she wanted to make a good impression on Naruto, and the baggy jeans, faded hoodie, and worn-out keds were not going to do it. She went to her closet to see what she had available as she started boiling noodles for the fettuccine alfredo she was making for tonight. She sighed as she realized she hadn't done any laundry this week, leaving her closet mostly empty except for a few odds and ends. That's when she remembered the skirt and blouse she'd bought for a failed job interview. The outfit consisted of a knee-length black pencil skirt she had purchased at a thrift store, a white blouse she had purchased while waiting tables at a nicer restaurant, and her favorite pair of high heels she hadn't worn in ages. She grabbed her clothes and ran back to the bathroom after checking on the water for the noodles. Okay. Granny panties and a plain boulder holder, not going to work with this outfit, she grumbled as she undressed and examined herself in the mirror. Rushing out of the bathroom, she skidded to a halt in front of her dresser, digging like a madwoman through her underwear drawer for the really good stuff she kept at the bottom. For later dates, black was out because the bra would show through the blouse, but not for first dates. The baby blue one was too cute, especially since it had little white bows and lace trim, which wasn't exactly what she was going for. That left her with two options: go without and just be the white lace panties she had, or wear the little white lace shelf bra that barely covered her nipples. Naruto took it out and looked at it, recalling the day and reason she bought it. Naruto was about to turn 16 and was going to be a bridesmaid for her foster parents' only biological daughter, Emily. Emily was 18 years old, 7 months pregnant, and about to marry the drunken frat boy who had knocked her up. Oh, and she was a total jerk to Naruto for the entire 2 years she lived with them. 2 years of being effectively a slave for their family and desperately trying to keep his foster hands fathers off her when he was drunk. Emily had wanted Naruto to be in the wedding party not because she genuinely wanted to embarrass her, but because she thought it would be fun to humiliate her. Each of the 4 bridesmaids wore a different colored gown that matched their date's tuxedo. Naruto wore a baby shit green dress that made her look more like a homeless woman than anything else. Naruto had agreed because she knew she couldn't leave the wedding without making a scene. She had decided the day before the wedding that if she had to look ugly on the outside, she would be beautiful on the inside. She stopped by the local mall on her way home from school the Friday before the wedding and went to one of the nicer clothing stores there. She found the white lace shelf bra and matching thong panties in a clearance bin at the back of the store and knew they were exactly what she needed. The lingerie set had been a little too big for her at the time, but a few safety pins had fixed the problem, and when she looked in the mirror the next day, she smiled, feeling truly beautiful for the first time ever. The next day, her hair was a disaster thanks to the stylist her sister hired to do their hair. Her dress was still a shambles, and everyone looked at her as if she were a disgrace, but Naruto just smiled to herself. She was beautiful on the inside no matter what she looked like on the outside. "Yeah, I'll need this tonight," she said as she returned to the bathroom to finish getting ready. It didn't take her long to get ready, and once dressed, she turned to check herself in the full-length mirror on the back of the bathroom door. Even if it was just her words, she looked stunning. There were now dozens of little multicolored post-it notes all around the mirror. Each had a unique message that she read on a regular basis to compensate for what she had been told over the years. Normally, she read them every morning, but she had been in a hurry this morning and had completely forgotten about them. The bright notes appeared to be cheerful, but they represented her attempt to forget some of her darkest days. They were her positive affirmations, and they helped keep her sane. "I am stunning. I am knowledgeable. I'm not crazy. I am not overweight. Everyone likes me. I have talent. I'm a nice person. I'll find someone who will love me." Naruto stopped reading the last one and smiled as she touched it with her fingers. Her previous foster family had always told her the day she left that she would never find anyone to love her, and it was the one who seemed to haunt her the most. After meeting Naruto, she hoped that particular post-it would soon be removed from her mirror. She'd had a feeling for him the night before and again the next morning. His smile had given her butterflies and made her heart flutter. Sure, there would be some challenges to overcome, such as the fact that she wasn't exactly normal, but that was something she could deal with over time. After all, she had only just met him, so spilling all her secrets on the first date was not high on her priority list. She might trust him with everything in time, but not right now. For the time being, she was only interested in seeing if he was the one. Only time would tell. Naruto smiled as she exited the bathroom and made her way to her door. It's time to make a first impression. Time had flown by, as it always did. Naruto and Naruko were content, or as content as two love-struck people can be when they live hand-to-mouth most of the time. Naruto knew he could make their lives a lot easier if he just traded in more of his Ryo from his old world, but he'd recently had the feeling he was being watched, which didn't sit well with him. It started the night the Hulk, as the papers dubbed the Green Creature, defended Harlem, and he'd had an itch on the back of his neck ever since, as if people were watching him. He had no idea who they were, and they were good at staying out of sight, which made him nervous. Only the fact that he didn't detect any negative emotions from them kept Naruto from going after them for answers. That, and his fear that Naruko would be caught in the crossfire. Naruko, there was another problem. They had been seeing each other for almost 2 years and were both hesitant to take their relationship into a more physical realm. It was the nagging thought for Naruto that maybe, just maybe, they were related in some strange way. Who was he to say she wasn't the world's version of him, even if her parents didn't resemble him? That thought alone kept his more amorous thoughts at bay, but Naruko had reasons as well. They shared a bed every night, and even when it got hot and heavy, she never complained when he stepped back to let things cool down. Naruto wondered if she had similar thoughts to his, but he never asked because he was afraid of the answer. Another strange aspect of his life was the group of friends he was forming around himself. He'd been called a few months ago to deliver food to the construction site of a new building in downtown Manhattan. The place was going to be enormous when finished, and Naruto couldn't wait to see what it looked like. Still, it was the owner who drew his attention. The man's name was Tony Stark, and he was frighteningly similar to Naruto's old mentor Jiraiya. A delivery and a brief conversation led to another delivery and another brief conversation. Naruto was soon introduced to Tony's assistant, Pepper Potts, a lovely young woman who reminded Naruto a lot of Shizune, Tsunade's student and assistant. Naruto and Naruko were soon invited over just to hang out with Tony and Pepper, who appeared to be avoiding each other and the obvious relationship they were developing. Life was strange, but good for Naruto, until he inadvertently drew more attention to himself. He initially thought it was a random occurrence, but he would later realize that the events of that morning had placed him squarely in the sights of a rather secretive government agency. Naruto was delivering food to some guards in an unnamed government building when the incident occurred. The guys were regulars, and Naruto always made time to crack a joke with them before heading off to his next delivery. Things were a little different that day because an alarm went off in the building just as he was about to leave, and everyone started running around like crazy. Naruto turned to leave, not wanting to get involved in the situation, when a young man in a t-shirt and khaki pants literally ran into him. It didn't seem like much, but considering Naruto had just enough warning to channel chakra to his muscles, the guy ran into him and bounced off him like he'd hit a solid wall. The man looked surprised, but he quickly rose to his feet and walked out the door. Naruto brushed it off and continued on his way, but he had noticed that even more people seemed to be following him since then. Now, the wise thing to do would have been to flee New York and wait for things to blow over. The problem was that he couldn't bear the thought of leaving Naruto, and he couldn't ask her to forego her education just for him. So, being the jerk that he was, Naruto just sucked it up and kept his eyes peeled for anyone who might cause them harm. He wasn't feeling any negative emotions, but he did have a general sense of curiosity and a tinge of fear. It was getting on his nerves until he got some answers from an unexpected source. Naruto and Naruto were invited to Tony's new penthouse apartment at the very top of the nearly finished Stark Tower. The place was incredible, at least in Naruto's opinion, because he had never seen anything like it. While Pepper and Naruto were discussing female matters, Tony was giving him the tour. Tony appeared to become serious as they stepped out onto the balcony. Serious and Tony did not belong in the same sentence, let alone the same city, but Naruto could tell from the way Tony stood that he was thinking about something. "You know, I'm a rather self-centered person," Tony smirked. "I admit it because it is true. The thing is, I'm also paranoid as a result of some of the events in my life. As a result, I'm asking for your forgiveness in advance." "Oh, this doesn't sound good," grumbled Naruto, eliciting a chuckle from Tony. "No, it really isn't," Tony admitted with a sad smile. "Naruto, I like you. You're a nice person. The problem is that, in my experience, good guys aren't always what they seem to be, so I did some investigating." Naruto sighed, sipping the Coke Tony had given him earlier. "Can you guess what that digging had to do with me?" Tony nodded, leaning against the balcony railing and gazing out over the city. "Yes, you guessed correctly. Imagine my surprise when I discovered you didn't exist. Sure, you have some excellent forgeries, but they only date back a little more than 2 years. Nothing before that. There is no medical history. There are no school records. Nothing. There was nothing. I checked the records in Japan, but there was still nothing. I checked immigration and found nothing. You're a ghost, which means one of two things. You're either a spy sent to spy on me and what I'm doing, or you're an illegal immigrant. Now, between the two of us, I'm hoping you're just an illegal because I can help you with that, but if you're a spy, we're going to have some issues. Only the fact that your name has been mentioned in a few government reports, all of which state that you are not a threat, has kept me from having you thrown out of the building and possibly the country. Couldn't you just leave things alone, Tony?" As he leaned back against the railing, looking in through the window at Naruto and Pepper chatting on the couch, a frustrated Naruto asked. "I'm not a spy, but I'm here illegally, if that's what you want to call it." "World?" Tony inquired. "Not country, but the entire world? That clarifies a lot." "Fuck. I didn't mean to say that," Naruto moaned. "Fine. You want to know the truth? I'll tell you the truth, or as much of it as I can." Naruto told Tony everything he remembered. He told him about his own world, a world in which chakra power trumped technology. Then he told Tony about his life, its ups and downs, but most importantly, his life as a shinobi. Before getting to the bits he was only guessing about, he skimmed over the war, mainly because he couldn't remember most of it. About how he knew he had been injured during the previous battle and what had happened to send him to this world. Naruto then told Tony about his first few months in this world, and how he eventually met Naruto and decided to settle down, even if he still trained like crazy at night. Another world, Tony mused. The possibilities for study are similar and yet different from this one, possibly even a different version of reality. If I hadn't suspected something like that from some sensor readings I took of you the last time you were here, I'd say you were insane. Subtle changes in quantum level harmonics. Great, the pit just keeps getting deeper and deeper, Naruto sighed before cutting Tony off. Then you'll tell me you collected DNA samples as well. Tony's embarrassed expression answered that one as the man tuned in to Naruto. So, I'm a jerk, and I've already admitted to being paranoid. Sue me. You can't. We must correct this. To say the least, the DNA results were intriguing. You've heard of mutants, right? As Tony continued, Naruto nodded, slightly concerned about where this was going. Mutants have a 0.05% difference in their base genetic code, which causes their abilities to manifest. You, on the other hand, have a 1% DNA variation that matches a human. However, you have approximately 50% more genetic material and no traces of junk DNA anywhere. You're human, or at least your body appears to be, but you're more like what humans could be after millions of years of evolution. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Naruto wondered, unsure of the answer. Tony shrugged, returning his gaze to the city as he spoke. I can tell you this much, it's different. Jarvis ran a slew of tests for me, and the results were astounding. You can regenerate from almost any wound that does not kill you instantly. Even so, I doubt you wouldn't regenerate over time. Don't even get me started on the subject of aging. Jarvis repeated the tests several times, and they all indicate that you will live a very long time because your cells regenerate perfectly each time. Lovely, Naruto groaned as he looked inside at Naruto. I'll live to see everyone I love and care about die. This is not something I am looking forward to. Tony turned to look inside, a sad smile on his face. I don't think you'd like that bit, but given your abilities, most of which I can only guess at, I can tell you one thing that might make you feel better. Yeah, you going to tell me you found a way for me to go home, 'cause that's not exactly what I'm looking for right now, Naruto replied, his voice dry and frowning. No, I can't say I've figured that one out, not that I've looked into it much, Tony admitted. Now, this may irritate you, but I did it after our last conversation about that young lady in there. Naruto recalled the conversation. Actually, they had a partially drunken ramble about 2 weeks before. Feeling bad about his fears about possibly being related to Naruto in some way. Naruto had needed someone to talk to, and the older man reminded him so much of Jiraiya that he was talking before he even realized what he was saying. Naruto had told Tony about his fears over the course of the night and half a dozen bottles of fine whiskey. Naruto had no idea Tony would remember the conversation because the man was so drunk he couldn't even talk, let alone remember anything. I guess he was wrong about that. The next morning, Jarvis reminded me of a promise I made to you, Tony continued. I had promised to find the answers for you, which led to me taking a DNA sample from the glass you were drinking from that night. I did the same thing with Naruto a few nights later, when you were both here. Fuck, Tony, yelled Naruto, thankful for the soundproof glass in the windows. You had no right to harm her. Sure, I was an unknown, but she's just a regular lady. What gave you the authority to do so? Tony nodded, his hands up in surrender. I know, I'm a jerk. It comes with the territory of being a genius with an ego the size of this structure. Larger than this building, to be sure, but that's beside the point. I promised you I'd get back to you, and I did. You have no connection to her in any way. The resemblance is uncanny, but it's just coincidence. There's no chance at all? Asked Naruto, a glimmer of hope in his stomach. Tony smiled as he shook his head. None. Yes, you appear the same on the outside, but on the inside, you are as different as can be. Thank you, Kami, exclaimed Naruto, his grin wide. Okay, I'll give you some slack after that news, but I'm still irritated. Good, Tony said, moving away from the balcony and closer to the window. She may not be related by blood, but she is a mutant. I'm not sure what her power is or if she's even aware of it, but she definitely carries the X gene. Naruto considered it for a moment, not really caring given what he had witnessed and done. It's not a problem. Back in my original world, I witnessed some strange occurrences. As far as I'm concerned, as long as she doesn't turn into a pasty white gay pedophile with a snake fetish, I'm fine. I'm not sure I even want to think about where you got that particular image, and I hate you for sharing it with me, Tony groaned, slightly shuddering. However, I believe that the young women in there will be very pleased with your views on the subject when she finally shares her secret with you or discovers her powers for the first time. Meanwhile, Jarvis, finish those Naruto papers. I need a complete background check, documentation, and paperwork by the end of the night. Also, provide him with copies of the SHIELD reports we discovered on him. Yes, sir, Tony's computer system's snooty British accented voice replied. Should I give him a clean background or something more notorious, similar to your own infamous past? Wow. Even your computer system knows you're an ass most of the time, smirked Naruto. How does it feel to know that even inanimate objects despise you most of the time? Oh, it's just dandy, Tony replied dryly. While Jarvis gets you back on track, I wanted to let you know that I'll be returning to Los Angeles tomorrow. I have the Stark Expo starting in a few days, then a few other things to take care of before returning here for the official ribbon cutting. Naruto nodded to his friend, the jerk that he could be at times. Tony, be cautious. I have an uneasy feeling about something. I have a tendency to follow my gut instincts, which comes with my training, and it's telling me that things are about to go bad. It could also be related to the fact that you smell like metal and are sick. Tony appeared surprised by the announcement. Buddy. Pal. A little creepy friend. What does this imply? Naruto looked over at Tony, noticing that the older man was slightly sweating. Your sweat smells metallic, just like that thing in your chest. You have slightly dilated pupils, an increased heart rate, and a slower reaction time than usual. It started when I brought the food over the other day, but it's gotten worse tonight. What you know, turn around is fair play and a bitch, Tony chuckled. Okay, you revealed your secret, so I'll reveal mine. My personal arc reactor's palladium is slowly poisoning me. My blood is gradually becoming toxic. It will kill me in a few months if I don't find a solution. The use of the Iron Man armor appears to be hastening the process, Jarvis' voice added. So, stop wearing the armor, Naruto suggested. Tony scoffed at the notion, turning around to gaze out over the city. Not possible, my fishy friend. Naruto snarled in response. I had a feeling you'd figure it out eventually. It's a maelstrom, just like a storm. Nah. I like fish, and your expression reminds me of a shark I encountered last month. Seriously, Tony, no one needs a dead hero, Naruto said, dismissing Tony's attempts to change the subject. I don't need a friend who is no longer alive. I need a living one who will have my back just as much as I will have his. You need a bodyguard, and I'll be your bodyguard until you figure it out, but you have to stay out of that fucking suit until you do. Tony sighed and finally turned to Naruto, a sad smile on his face. The amount of time I spend in the suit versus out of it makes no difference. I'm going to die either way unless I find a cure, it's that simple. No, life is never that simple, Naruto countered. It may appear to be, but if you look beneath the surface, there is always something more you haven't seen before. Well, then, I guess I'll take you up on your offer, Tony smirked. I might not need a bodyguard, but if you can see something I can't, you've got my job. Whatever, Naruto chuckled before remembering something. Tell me about this shield, then. Naruto thought Tony was joking until Pepper handed him papers to sign, proving he was now an official employee of Stark Enterprises. The disadvantage was that he was leaving with Tony and Pepper in the morning, while Naruto remained in New York to finish the last month of her semester's classes. On the plus side, Tony offered them a suite in Stark Tower, directly beneath his own. Naruto was overjoyed, so she pounced on Tony and kissed his cheeks several times, much to Naruto's chagrin and Tony's delight. Only by keeping his hands as far away from Naruto's body as possible did Tony avoid getting his $1 handed to him. Naruto was lying in bed with Naruto in his arms, reflecting on everything that had happened that night. Tony's revelation that Naruto was a mutant surprised him, but given the number of bloodline users Naruto had met over the years, it wasn't a big deal to him. The fact that they weren't related lifted a huge weight off his shoulders, though to be honest, the way he felt about her, he probably wouldn't have cared if she was his sister. Incest was a major taboo in this world, or at least in this part of it, but most of the major clans back on his original world had practiced it to keep their bloodlines pure. The problem was that he doubted Naruto would ever accept it, and he would never do anything to hurt her. That was a lifetime promise. As he stroked her hair as he watched her sleep, her head resting on his chest, he realized he was thinking that this would be a lifetime commitment, or at least as much as he could make given the other news. A longer life, something he had never considered because of his chosen profession. It was a very real possibility in this world, with no wars to fight or enemies chasing him. Naruto and everyone else he knew would eventually die, but he would live on. Did he truly want to live that way? Making connections with people only to watch them wither and fade over time, leaving him alone and heartbroken time and again. What kind of life would that be, constantly burying his loved ones and having to wait indefinitely before being reunited with them in the next life? What exactly are you thinking? Naruto inquired, which surprised him because he assumed she was sleeping. Naruto smiled as she rolled further onto his chest, allowing her palms to rest against it and her chin to rest on them. I'm contemplating us and life in general. Naruto smiled, that special smile she had that made his problems seem insignificant. How about we? Naruto realized something important as she looked at him, and he suddenly felt the need to tell her. You should know that I adore you. I love you with everything I am, Naruto Namikaze. Naruto gasped, either from the announcement or from the intensity of his voice. He saw her cheeks flush, her breathing quicken, and her heartbeat quicken as her eyes welled up with tears. He initially thought it was the wrong thing to say, but when she suddenly kissed him, he knew he had said the right thing. The kiss lasted an eternity, or at least a minute, though it was difficult to tell. When they finally parted, Naruto had a goofy grin on his face that was matched by Naruto's. I love you, Naruto Uzumaki, she said, tears still streaming down her cheeks and a smile on her face. I believe I've loved you since the first morning in your apartment, when you drew me into your arms while you were still half asleep. I felt so safe and warm in your arms that I didn't want to leave them. You never have to, if you don't want to, he replied, his own eyes welling up with tears. The next 20 minutes or so were heated, to say the least, but before they took that final step, he paused and drew Naruto close, saying, no, not yet. Before we go that far, I have some things I need to tell you. What things? She asked, her voice tinged with fear and frustration. So he explained to her. He revealed everything to her. From his origins to his concerns about her being a blood relative. He told her about his burden and partner, Kurama, and how the fox had been sleeping since they arrived on this planet. He then told her how he felt about her and how she was the only reason he remained in New York. Most importantly, he expressed his love and trust for her, hoping she would forgive him for his lies and half-truths. He expected her to become angry and reject him, but to his surprise, she giggled and kissed him again. I was wondering when you'd tell me the truth, she said after the kiss. I'd suspected you were different for months. I caught you making one of your clones and sending it off to make us breakfast while you thought I was still sleeping one morning. I was initially concerned, but after sneaking out one night to watch you train, I realized you were unique but special, just like me. The fact that I never felt you would hurt me, even after seeing how lethal you could be, made me want to be patient, knowing you would tell me when you were ready. Naruto sat up slowly, allowing the covers to fall off her bare back as she slid out of bed and stood naked in front of him. He hadn't seen her naked before, but there was something magical about the way she looked right then. Her body seemed to glow, with her lightly tanned skin, perfectly formed breasts, narrow waist, perfect hips, and long-toned legs. That's when he noticed the difference. Naruto had to admit that one of the things he liked best about Naruko's body was that she had no hair on her body except for a baby-fine dusting of blonde hair on her arms and, of course, the hair on her head. Something about that made his heart beat faster, as it seemed to make touching her skin feel even better. With that in mind, it was a little strange to watch as hair began to sprout on her body. It started on her arms and legs, then spread to her breasts and groin. It spread slowly, even as her arms, feet, and face began to lengthen. He watched her lean forward in slow motion until she was standing on 4 legs, her ears becoming pointed and moving to the top of her head. Her delicate nose and full lips formed a muzzle, and whiskers appeared after a few seconds. The most unexpected sight was when 2 long fluffy tails sprouted from the base of her spine. Naruto smiled as the transformation was completed, and Naruko sat back on her haunches. He could see the concern in her eyes as she sat there waiting for him to speak. When he got out of bed and kneeled in front of Naruko, the now human-sized golden fox, she cocked her head to one side, hope in her eyes. Naruto simply smiled at her before wrapping his arms around her neck and hugging her. "Well, that's ironic," he said into her now pointed ear. "I've always suspected you were a fox, and it turns out I was correct. Just keep in mind that you're my fox now and forever." Naruko basically attached herself to Naruto in an embrace that rivaled even Tsunade Best-chan's efforts after transforming back into her human form. This quickly turned into another round of passionate kisses and wandering hands, but this time neither of them was satisfied. Naruto declared the night an SSS-ranked evening by the time the sun rose the next morning. When asked what that meant, he simply kissed her again and explained that it meant sexy, satiated, and sleepy, which earned him a poke in the side as they drifted off to sleep for a few hours before Naruto had to leave. It was difficult for them both to leave, and Naruko made him promise to call her whenever he had the chance. Naruto made that promise before kissing her one last time before boarding Tony's private jet, reminding her that he never broke his promises. Naruto spent the majority of the flight researching Stark Enterprises, which shocked Pepper and Tony when they discovered Naruto was using 5 clones to learn everything he could in a limited amount of time. Naruto explained the clone technique and chakra in general to the clones as they read. Tony was fascinated by the idea that a human could generate that level of power, to create mass from pure energy, and was taking notes and writing down ideas faster than anyone else could. Because Naruto corrected several of Tony's notes, the blonde revealed that he had read and memorized the entire contents of the New York Public Library. Pepper fell asleep quickly as the 2 men began discussing some extremely esoteric theories, but she smiled at the thought that finally, someone might be able to keep up with Tony. "So, you use all the traditional ninja stuff, right?" Tony asked that night as they stood in the man's basement workshop. "How about swords, throwing stars, and smoke pellets?" When Naruto heard the word ninja, he cringed because it had some negative connotations in this world. "I prefer to think of myself as a shinobi rather than a ninja." "Sure, we called ourselves ninja in my world, but we were more like glorified samurai. Less sneaking around at night and more confronting your adversary head-on. That's not to say we couldn't do everything a ninja in this world could do, but we were a little more forthright about it, and that's what I mostly use." While speaking, Naruto pulled out the scroll containing all of his equipment. That could have been a mistake, because as soon as he opened the package, they went on a 20-minute tangent about subspace pockets and logic gates being used to manipulate them. They eventually returned to the original topic, Naruto's equipment. A wide variety of weapons that Naruto had been carrying when he arrived on this world were laid out in front of them. The majority of it had been damaged, but some of it was still in good condition. "So, this wire?" Tony inquired, picking up a small loop of shinobi wire. "This stuff is incredible. It is finer than human hair. How in the world did they make this? I'm guessing you use it as a tripwire?" Naruto shrugged, his gaze fixed on the wire in Tony's grasp. "I'm not sure how they make it, but I'm guessing it involves highly focused chakra being channeled into it as it's stretched. In terms of applications, it can be used as a tripwire or to entangle an opponent. I've used it to scale buildings and as a weapon once, channeling elemental chakra through it to cut a steel pillar in half." "Jarvis, please remind me to get the details of elemental chakra," Tony mumbled as he sat down the wire and picked up a kunai. "Light. It's much lighter than it should be for a garment of this size. Jarvis, I require a thorough examination of this metal. It's similar to the gold titanium alloy that I used in my suits." Naruto just stood there and watched Tony go through all of the weapons. The explosive tags were popular, despite the fact that they were mostly duds that Naruto had never been able to get rid of. A broken ninjutsu, a few broken shuriken, and several smoke pellets were also present. Jarvis examined everything, replacing the kunai and throwing stars with Tony's personal fabrication equipment. He offered to replace the ninjutsu, but Naruto explained that he never liked the thing in the first place, so what was the point? After 2 hours, Naruto had a restocked weapons supply as well as new shin and forearm guards, thanks to Tony scavenging them from an early mock-up of his Iron Man armor. "They don't do anything cool, unlike my suits, but they'll keep you safe," Tony offered as Naruto went through a standard kata, attempting to adjust to the extra weight on his arms and legs. "Do you want me to make you some chest armor?" "Not right now," Naruto replied with a smirk. "When fighting, too much armor gets in the way. It dulls the senses and gives you a false sense of security, which is completely false. Someone will always be stronger than you, someone who will hurt you when you least expect it." "Well, if they can hurt you while you're wearing my armor, they must be packing some serious punch," Tony said confidently. "My armor can withstand a tank hit and not buckle." "Really?" Naruto inquired, a smirk on his face. "Do you want to place a bet? So, if I can dent your armor, do you want to buy some old coins from me?" "Sure," Tony replied instantly, never thinking Naruto could even scratch his armor. "If I win, which I believe I will, you must wear a pink tutu and sing I'm a Little Teapot the next time we go out." "Deal," was Naruto's immediate response, which should have worried Tony a little. "You know how you said those kunai were like your armor? But what about them?" Naruto simply smirked as he walked over to a chestplate blank that Tony was playing with. "Is this your regular stuff or a mock-up?" "Actually, that's an improved version," Tony replied, looking at one of Naruto's ruined explosive tags. "That one is rated to be 25% stronger than the suit I normally wear." Naruto smirked as his eyes changed to those of a toad, channeling a small amount of nature chakra he had collected earlier. "Then this will be ideal for what I'm planning." That piqued Tony's interest, and he turned around to watch Naruto lift the chest plate off its stand and wad it up in his hands like wet tissue paper. Naruto turned the chest plate into a wad of scrap in seconds, then squeezed the resulting mass between his hands until he left hand prints in it. Naruto returned to Tony with one of his trademark grins after allowing the nature chakra to dissipate. He turned and walked towards the stairs, dropping the wad of ruined metal to the ground with a deafening crash. "I can snap one of those original kunai with just my fingers. I'll simply go get those coins," as he opened the glass security door, he said. "I hope you brought your wallet." Naruto was on the phone with Naruto the next night as he stood backstage at the start of the Stark Expo. "Yes, Tony will make a grand entrance, and then we'll return to the house. We'll try to meet you in New York tomorrow night, but you know Tony, so don't be surprised if we're late." Naruto assured him, "I'm already packed." Pepper had called earlier, saying she'd drag him to the airport kicking and screaming if necessary. Oh, and a man came by earlier. I think he said his name was Colton or Colson. He appeared to be a nice guy, but he was very insistent on speaking with you right away. I heard about him from Tony and Pepper, Naruto said, looking up as Tony approached in his Iron Man suit. He works for a company with whom Tony has previously dealt. Tony says the guy is a wimp, but Pepper says he's fine. Given Tony's opinions on most people, I'll go with Pepper's. Is there anything he left behind? Naruto could hear Naruto mumbling something before speaking again, just as Tony entered the stage. Yes, he did leave a card with a number. You interested? No, I'll get it from you tomorrow night, he nearly yelled over the din of the crowd and the music that was playing. Listen, I can't even hear myself talk right now, so I'll see you tomorrow night. I adore you. I adore you as well. He could barely hear. Bye. Bye. He yelled back, disconnecting the phone call and turning to watch Tony as he introduced his father's film and walked off stage. Now that's how you make an entrance, Tony said as he walked over to Naruto and pulled a silver object from his pocket. How bad is the toxicity? Concerned for his friend, Naruto inquired. Tony shrugged as the machine pricked and tested his finger. Not bad, but not spectacular. Palladium levels have increased by 1%. Don't worry, Tony, Naruto said as he rested his hand on the older man's shoulder, we'll figure it out. That is a guarantee. Naruto was currently assisting Tony in his training 2 days later. The man lacked Naruto's raw strength, but he was quick on his feet and had good reflexes. Tony's chauffeur and bodyguard, Happy Hogan, was watching from the sidelines, having previously attempted to go head-to-head with Naruto and gotten his bell rung pretty loudly for the attempt. Of course, Naruto apologized and then pointed out several flaws in Happy's defense, which the man firmly stated he would work on before their next spar. That's how Tony got involved. After seeing how effective Naruto's fighting style was, he wanted to learn, and though he was just getting started, he was making a good effort. Naruto was impressed by Tony's eagerness to learn, and he was even sweating a little from the workout, not that he was going to tell anyone that he was holding back the majority of his abilities. Are you certain you want to sign over your company to Pepper? He asked, ducking beneath Tony's fist. Tony, who was trying to focus on the spar, nodded, never taking his gaze away from Naruto. Yes, I have too much on my plate right now to focus on the business. She's the right person for the job, and I'm confident she'll do it right. Pepper walked into the room at that point, followed by a young woman with long blood-red hair and a natural grace about her. Naruto was immediately on edge as he recognized her walk as that of someone who had extensive training in both combat and stealth. As he concentrated on the woman, he barely heard Tony and Pepper's banter. She was beautiful, though Naruto, in Naruto's opinion, could put her to shame, but it was the air of confidence she exuded that drew his full attention. She's dangerous, Naruto grumbled, just loud enough for Tony to hear. Tony called the woman over, turning to Naruto with a questioning look. How do I address you? Natalie Rushman, Mr. Stark, she replied, sounding far too cheerful for Naruto's liking. Well, Natalie, come on up here and tell me about yourself, Tony smirked. As Natalie made her way over to the boxing ring where they were standing, Pepper scowled at him. A normal person would have missed it, but Naruto noticed the girl twitch as if she was about to bow to the mat and knew she was hiding something. He was immediately put on edge by the grace with which she entered the ring, and he focused inwards for a second to see if he detected any negative emotions. Thankfully, there were none, but she was clearly concealing something and lying about her name. Naruto, Tony drew the blonde's attention. Why don't you check to see if Natalie here is capable of self-defense? Naruto deduced from Tony's hard expression that he wanted to see what she was capable of. Absolutely, Tony. Show me what you've got, Natalie. Naruto watched as the young woman assumed an obviously incorrect defensive posture, but it was the fact that she had to force herself to stand incorrectly that revealed the true level of her abilities. The woman pretended to be only competent at what she was doing, but Naruto could also play that game. He waited until she was distracted by something Pepper said before striking out with a loose fist at her. She took the bait, and in a move that would have made Rock Lee proud, she launched an attack and tried her damnedest to knock Naruto to the ground. It was entirely instinctual, and it failed spectacularly. He broke her grip on his arm instantly, then used the momentum to drive his knee into her ribs, rotated back with his right fist to her jaw, and knocked her flat on her ass in the time it takes someone to blink. Natalie jumped back to her feet and tried to attack him again, but Naruto reinforced his body with such a small amount of chakra that when her punch landed, all she managed to do was hurt her hand. Naruto had her pinned to the ground with his hand clamped around her throat before she could blink, astounded that he hadn't even moved. "It appears that someone has been lying to us," Naruto said calmly, though his gaze was currently fixed on the girl. "You're very well trained, Natalie, or whatever your name is, but nowhere near my level. So, unless you want me to break your arms and legs, then your pretty little face, you'll tell me who you are." Pepper was calling security at the same time, knowing full well that Tony trusted Naruto. So, if Naruto said she wasn't who she claimed to be, it was true. Natalie, on the other hand, was looking up at Naruto with a mixture of rage and embarrassment. Naruto could tell the woman had never been in a situation like this before, but that's what happens when you underestimate your opponent and overestimate yourself. He was an expert in this area, having made the same error numerous times when he was younger. Jiraiya had to work hard to break that habit, but Naruto had learned the hard way that even an untrained civilian could kill you if they were lucky. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," she said after a moment, trying to keep her emotions in check. "Please, you're hurting me, and all I was doing what Mr. Stark wanted, showing you what I'm capable of." "Lie," Naruto said, his voice cold and dead. "That was your gift. I'm going to break one of your arm bones the next time you lie to me. If you lie to me again, I'll break another bone in your arm. I'll eventually move on to your other arm, and then your legs. If you keep it up, I'll break each of your ribs one at a time before moving on to the bones in your face. That's a lot of bones and a lot of discomfort. I can see in your eyes that you have been trained to resist pain, and I recognize the slightly glazed look in your eyes as you try to separate your mind from your body, but the pain will seep into your mind after the first 20 or so bones. It'll feel like fire along your nerves, dragging you back to reality, and because I know what I'm doing, you won't be blacking out anytime soon. So you have 3 choices. 1. Please tell me the truth. 2. Tell the truth and accept the consequences. 3. Suffocate in your own blood by biting off your own tongue. Naruto could tell she was surprised when he mentioned the third option, but he could also see she debated it for a moment, so he added salt to the wound. That third one won't help you much because I'll learn just as much from your corpse as I will from your words. What will it be, Natalie? Alright, she snarled, my name is Natalia Romanova. I'm a SHIELD field agent, and I've been sent here to keep an eye on Tony Stark as his health deteriorates. What's she talking about, Tony? Pepper demanded, motioning for her to remain silent while Naruto interrogated the spy. So, does SHIELD know about that? Naruto inquired after noticing her nod. And they thought you'd sneak in to steal Tony's Iron Man armor when his health deteriorated? Is that why you had your agent Coulson try to talk to me at my house, to divert my attention away from your dirty work? No, that was not my assignment, the young lady replied. I was only supposed to keep an eye on things and report back to SHIELD if things got out of hand. I'm not sure what Agent Coulson's assignment is, but SHIELD has been watching you since the Harlem incident. Naruto nodded. She had told the truth, albeit only partially. You've got your eyes on me now, but I'm going to have mine on you. Here's the deal. You're going to tell Director Fury, yes, I know who he is thanks to Tony, that if he ever sends one of his agents near Naruto again, I'm going to hunt him and the rest of SHIELD down and break them all, just like I broke you. Naruto created 20 clones of himself with a barely conscious flare of chakra, each sneering at the now terrified woman. Ms. Romanova, these are not delusions, and I am not to be taken lightly. Consider me a legion of highly trained and protective warriors. I'll find you all and stop you from hurting the people who are important to me." A man's voice from the doorway said, "Message received." Naruto looked up to see a tall black man wearing all black, a long trench coat, and an eye patch over his left eye. "Mr. Uzumaki, this was not how I wanted to meet you." "Hello, my name is Nick Fury," Naruto interrupted the man. "From what I can tell, he is the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and a moderately trained warrior. I must confess that my first impression of you is negative. That being said, please leave Tony and me alone. He and Pepper, as well as anyone else involved with them in Naruto, are all under my protection." Fury appeared to be about to say something, but the sudden appearance of one of Naruto's clones at his side with a kunai at the man's neck made him reconsider. "Please accept my apologies, Mr. Uzumaki. I was simply looking for the son of a friend. I meant no harm to you or your friends. Could you please release my agent now?" Naruto nodded, releasing Natalia's neck and leaping away from her before she could even consider striking him. "Sure. Take your agent with you, but keep in mind what I said. This is the only warning I have for you." Naruto kicked himself later that night for acting so hastily. He had made a serious adversary of Director Fury and Agent Romanova, not to mention S.H.I.E.L.D. as a whole, but he was terrified that warriors like them would harm Naruto. He had allowed his fear to cloud his judgment, exacerbating an already dire situation. No, he would never hurt Agent Romanova, but she didn't know that and was correct to be suspicious of him. After they left, Naruto immediately called Naruko to warn her about S.H.I.E.L.D., and she promised to be cautious, but he was still concerned about her safety because he was so far away. Add to that Pepper and Tony's screaming match as he tried to brush off the comments about his health, and both men were in a bad mood. Jarvis' voice jolted Naruto out of his reverie. "There is a call on your private line, sir." "Who are you, Jarvis?" "It's a Mr. Fury," Jarvis said as Naruto approached and took his cell phone. "He says there are no hard feelings, but he really wants to speak with you." Naruto sighed and pressed the call connection button, saying, "Before you say anything, I'd like to apologize for my earlier actions. I acted rashly and unthinkingly." "Well, at least you're man enough to admit it," said the deep voice of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s director. "But I can't put all the blame on you. I knew you were more than you appeared, so I sent Agent Romanova in. So, let's just call it a wash and move on." "I can live with that," Naruto agreed, hoping the man was being truthful. "What can I do for you now, Director Fury?" The immediate response was, "We need to talk. If you have the time right now, I'd like to meet with you. Just you and me in public. And the battalion of highly trained agents I'm sure you'll have surrounding the area in case I get out of hand," snarled Naruto, though not in a malicious manner. "Bring whoever you want. I'm not picky." "I like you," Fury grumbled. He saw right through the lie and made no fuss about it. "That cannot be said for many people. A dinner is about 5 miles up the road. I'll be there in about 30 minutes, so if you could meet me there, I'd be happy to buy." "Fine, but can we skip the red rose in a book?" Naruto joked. "I don't think I'll have any trouble tracking you down." "Smartass," grumbled Fury before hanging up the phone. Naruto put his phone in his pocket and snatched the leather jacket Naruko had given him for Christmas from the chair it was hanging on. He went downstairs and found Tony nursing a drink on the couch, Pepper asleep with her head in his lap. Tony simply shrugged as he questioned the unusually solemn-looking billionaire. Tony explained, "She wore herself out yelling at me. I'm sure you heard about it. I'm pretty sure they heard it in New York. Is she going to be okay?" Naruto wondered as he zipped up his jacket. Tony shrugged once more as he gazed down at the sleeping woman. "I believe so. I told her everything, and she's determined to help me find a cure in any way she can. She hit me twice, so I know she's concerned." Naruto smiled and nodded. "She is genuinely concerned about you." Cammy has no idea why, but she does. Anyway, I received a call from Fury. We're getting together to try to calm things down. I just wanted to let you know in case something goes wrong while I'm away. I'll have Jarvis set up the security protocols, and we'll go down to the basement just in case, Tony said. Are you going to be okay on your own, or do you want me to suit up? Naruto shook his head and looked at his friend. No, I'll be just fine. You, on the other hand, should stay out of that suit unless it's the end of the world. We're already on a tight schedule. Don't add to it. There are currently 500 clones reading over anything and everything that may possibly help, so get some rest for now. I'll be right back. You know how much I despise doing nothing. Naruto shrugged, knowing full well that Tony would be at his workstation as soon as Pepper was settled in. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he walked down to the garage and saw his newest toy. Naruto had ended up with a fairly large chunk of change in his wallet after Tony had purchased the gold Ryo from him at the current price of the metal. When all was said and done, the coins netted him a tidy $4.5 million. That being said, taxes would be a killer this year, but with the majority of it invested in Stark Enterprises under Pepper's control, Naruto was confident he would make a profit. While the majority of the funds were invested in Stark stock, $500,000 was deposited in Naruto's bank account. Naruto was taken aback when she discovered that her tuition for her final 2 years had already been paid in full. Even after that, Naruto still had money in his pocket and a desire to own something rather than borrow it from Tony. Naruto had done some research on motorcycles and was now the proud owner of a brand new orange and black Ducati Monster. The motorcycle was sleek and sexy in the way that only a woman and a motorcycle can be. Naruto wished Naruko was there with him to enjoy a night ride on the bike as he mounted and started it. Unfortunately, he still had a few weeks before the end of her semester, but he promised himself that they would go riding when the time came. Naruto saw the time and realized he needed to get moving if he wanted to arrive on time. Fury beat him there despite the fact that it took him only 15 minutes to get there. Outside the dinner, he parked his motorcycle, a nice little silver trailer-like structure that looked completely out of place, right down to the smell of fresh paint on the sign. Closing his eyes, Naruto reached out to investigate the surroundings, discovering 20 men in hiding and 1 woman. One enraged woman who, by the looks of things, didn't want him dead but also didn't want him healthy. Naruto created 1 clone and dispersed it almost instantly as he walked through the door. Other than Fury, the only other people in the place were a cook and a waitress, both of whom smelled like gun oil and leather. The smug-looking black man, for his part, was sitting at the dinner's bar, dead center and in full view of every window. Wow, you really went all out for this one, Naruto said as he took a seat next to Fury. I moved this entire establishment in about 2 hours ago, if I'm reading the signs correctly, and even painted a sign and parking spaces specifically for this meeting. I'm really impressed. Fury was about to say something when the doors reopened and the clones began frog marching in SHIELD operatives. Agent Romanova did not appear happy, whether because she had been captured so quickly or because the 2 clones who had captured her had disarmed her. In fact, all the operatives had been disarmed. What surprised them all even more was when the clones handed the weapons back to the operatives and vanished, except for 10 of them who instantly transformed into waitresses and cooks and began taking orders. The original cook and waitress were escorted to a table as the clones took over the kitchen and began preparing coffee and food. Even fully stocked the kitchen, Naruto exclaimed as one of the 3 clones present dispelled. This will make things easier. So, Fury, what do you want? Now, Nick Fury was used to being in command of everything around him at all times. So, for his agents, having the best shield had to offer captured in less time than it took Naruto to walk from the parking lot to the time it sat down was a little unsettling. The fact that Naruto could create solid clones of himself was bad enough, but the fact that each of them probably only had a fraction of his power scared the blonde sitting next to him silly. Surprisingly, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee emanating from the pots behind the counter did nothing to improve the situation. You're a dangerous man, Mr. Uzumaki, Fury snarled. You also play a risky game with forces you can never hope to comprehend. Call me Naruto, the young shinobi said, smiling. Get real about not understanding. Since I was a child, I've been trained to be a shinobi. It's not difficult to understand. You work for a government that requires you to remain hidden. They rarely understand the sacrifices you must sometimes make to keep them safe, yet they continue to ask you to make those sacrifices. You've lied, cheated, killed, maimed, stolen, blackmailed, and done whatever else was necessary to complete your mission. At the end of the day, the only thing that keeps you from going insane is knowing that what you're doing is keeping your loved ones safe. The only distinction between us is the number of precious people we safeguard. You protect a country, while I protect a few people, but I will do whatever it takes to keep my precious people safe, just like you. Alright, so you understand, Fury admitted, though he didn't appear pleased. I've had my eye on you for quite some time. When I looked into your background, ignoring the lovely little whitewashed piece of crap Stark created for you, I discovered you don't exist. That sparked a fire in my belly. I don't like mysteries, and you're a big-ass mystery. You didn't exist until 2 years ago. Naruto remained silent, sipping on the coffee that one of his clones had placed in front of him. He was looking around the room. Most of the agents were acting calmly, but he could tell they were ready to fight at any moment. Other than himself, the only person who appeared relaxed was Agent Romanova, who was happily eating a plate of freshly made chocolate chip pancakes. Naruto didn't believe her for a second, noticing she had both her guns rested on her thighs, ready to shoot him in an instant. Overall, it felt like any other shinobi village he'd visited, tense and ready to explode at the slightest mistake. That's when one of my people brought me a report about a strange energy fluctuation that occurred around the time you arrived in New York, Fury continued, ignoring the plate of pancakes and cup of coffee in front of him. Then I discovered an old report from the Harlem incident, which I'm sure you remember, as well as footage of you being hit by a flying car. The car was totaled, but you walked away unscathed. Back then, standard procedure was to monitor anyone who could pose a future threat, but your file never made it to my desk. It doesn't matter if you call it luck or bad staffing. Then, not long ago, I discover you've been delivering takeout orders to my goddamn doorstep, Fury roared, a small vein throbbing in his temple as Naruto began his second helping of waffles and requested a refill of his coffee. Once again, no one bothered to inform me that someone on our watch list was in the building. I found out when Agent Coulson was reviewing security footage and recognized you from an ongoing file. Then he calls to say he saw you and your girlfriend move into Stark Tower, where you now work as a freelance security consultant. I'm also a bodyguard and personal trainer, Naruto added, his mouth full of waffles. If you've got a point, Fury, make it. So far, you've just been spewing hot air and hazy theories that I couldn't care less about. I accepted responsibility for my errors, but that doesn't mean I'm going to sit here and listen to you ramble just because you seem to find the sound of your own voice intimidating. I've seen much worse things in my life than you, so please excuse me if your antics and yelling mean little to nothing to me. I'm leaving if you're just trying to intimidate me. You're fucking surrounded, Fury growled, sick of Naruto's attitude. What makes you think you're going to get out of here alive? Naruto simply laughed in his face as he finished his coffee and smiled at Fury. What gives you the impression that I was ever truly present? Naruto vanished in a cloud of smoke, along with all of his clones and the weapons he had returned earlier. That left Fury and 21 of his best agents sitting in the middle of nowhere, unarmed, with nothing but the aroma of coffee and pancakes in the room to show for it. Agent Romanova approached Fury and took a seat next to him, a grudging respect on her face. I'm sorry to say it, but he's got skill and style, she admitted quietly. I'd never heard him before the clones cornered me in the woods. I was disarmed and dragged here so quickly that I couldn't even react. The only thing the clone said to me on the way here was that I was pretty good, though I needed a lot of practice to be a real shinobi. The unfortunate thing is that I believe he was serious. From his perspective, we aren't particularly skilled or a significant threat to him. I know, Fury grumbled, finally taking a sip of his coffee and wondering why his food never tasted this good. It was clear in his eyes. He's seen the wars, just like us, but I get the impression that whatever he was involved in was a lot nastier and much more up close and personal. Romanova nodded, having had the same impression of Naruto in her 2 meetings with him. Sir, what are your orders? Keep him and Stark under surveillance for the time being, Fury said as he stood up to leave. Tell Agent Coulson to stay at Stark Tower for the time being, but to keep his distance from Mr. Uzumaki's girlfriend. I don't think the kid will get nasty unless we push him, but I'm not going to let this go until I know whether or not he poses a threat. Romanova nodded, unaware that the dried leaf stuck to her boot had vanished in a puff of smoke. In fact, none of the agents from that night noticed when ants, twigs, and other insignificant items fell off their uniforms after they returned to base. Naruto's spies knew every shield base, agent, and current operation by the next morning's sunrise. He had been a knucklehead in his youth, which he fully admitted now, but that had changed during his war. If SHIELD ever attacked him or anyone under his protection, Naruto would be prepared, and they would be sorry. That was all there was to it. Meanwhile, Naruto was groaning to himself about a mile away. He'd let his inner knucklehead out once more and made a shambles of things. Call it a learned reaction, but he didn't take well to people attempting to intimidate him, and what he thought would be a brilliant prank had turned into another mess he'd have to clean up later. This was not how he had planned for the meeting with Fury, but he had acted without thinking. How did it feel to be more mature and a better person? It wasn't, and that was the problem because he would now have to work even harder to atone for his actions. I need to be better, he grumbled as he hopped on his bike and returned to Tony's. Naruto was escorting Tony and Pepper into a very posh restaurant in Monaco 2 days later. Naruto was on his arm, thrilled to be invited along. There were the standard introductions to the rich and famous, of which Tony mentioned Naruto would be one because of his investments in Stark Industries. The fact that he was carrying a modified version of Iron Man armor disguised as a briefcase made him a little nervous, but Tony's argument that they never knew when they might need it carried some truth, so Naruto agreed. It didn't mean he liked it, but it also meant he couldn't argue with it. I feel so underdressed, Naruto said, despite the fact that she was wearing a dress that cost more than their old apartment rent. Naruto simply leaned down and kissed her on the cheek, saying, whether you're wearing that lovely dress or jeans and a t-shirt, you're the most beautiful woman in this room. Nobody here compares to you. Naruto blushed at the compliment, thinking to herself that her boyfriend would be extremely fortunate later on. Naruto realized something was wrong half an hour later. Tony had excused himself to use the restroom a few moments before, and now he was on television announcing that he would be driving the Stark car in the race. Naruto just cringed as Pepper began to rant, deciding that being Tony's friend was not always a good thing. Sparks started flying minutes after the race started. A man wielding electrified whips was attacking the race cars as Tony approached his position on the track. Naruto flew out of there with a quick kiss for Naruto. Naruto smashed through the window and took to the rooftops, racing towards the scene of the attack. Rooftop travel was a bust because there was nearly as much traffic up there due to spectators and camera crews as there was on the ground, which meant Naruto had to drop to the ground and race through the crowds of spectators. He arrived just in time to witness Tony's car being attacked by the guy with the whips, hoping Tony had the foresight to tuck his legs in or he'd be looking for some much shorter pants from now on. Naruto took to the air, breaking through the final barrier and landing with both feet in the middle of the guy's back, knocking the moron to the ground. Naruto rolled forward, noticing Tony had crawled clear of the wreckage, looking stunned but otherwise unharmed, and slid the Iron Man armor to his friend. Naruto spun around and pulled out 2 kunai, then launched an attack while Tony dressed. Naruto dodged a whip as the man managed to get back to his feet, channeling even more chakra through his body. He would have been impressed if the whip hadn't nearly cut a driver in half as he tried to flee, with only Naruto's deflection of the whip with a thrown kunai allowing the innocent man to escape. The distraction cost him as the maniac smacked him in the chest with the other whip. Thankfully, Naruto now had enough chakra in his system to harden his skin, which had previously required nature chakra but had recently been accomplished with his own. Sure, it stung like hell and burned like hell, but try getting hit with an electrified tentacle and see how you feel. The nut job obviously didn't expect Naruto to just shrug off his attack, because he looked stunned as Naruto got in close and punched him several times in the chest and face. Hearing Tony call his name, Naruto drew the man forward, rolling backwards and kicking the man up into the air with his legs. Tony then hit him with 2 repulsor blasts to his shoulders, cutting off the power supply to the whips. Meanwhile, Naruto had used his impressive speed to get up behind the now falling man, grab hold of what appeared to be a metal brace on his back, and spin the man around before slamming him face first into the pavement. The sounds of breaking bones and shorting electrical circuits indicated that the man would not be getting up anytime soon. Naruto stood there watching as Tony kicked the man on his back, removing a glowing power cell from the man's chest armor and disabling any weapon systems he might still have. "Well, that was fun," Tony said, his voice distorted by the Iron Man armor. "Yeah, real fun, Tony," Naruto said, looking over at his friend. "Now turn off that fucking suit before it causes more harm than good." Tony simply nodded as he turned off the suit. "Yes, ma'am. Mother, I'll be a good boy." "Oh, you don't have to worry about me, Tony," Naruto said, a sly grin on his face. "You should be concerned about Pepper." "Naruto!" yelled a voice he hadn't expected to hear so soon. Naruto turned around to see his upset-looking girlfriend running towards him, and Tony just smirked. "Look over there. It appears that I am not the only one who is in for a rough night." "Tony," Naruto said just before Naruto tackled him, "some days I really don't like you." Naruto, grateful for his ability to heal quickly, sat on Tony's plane later that day, Naruto's head in his lap. To say she was irritated would be an understatement. She had screamed and yelled at him for an hour before breaking down in tears. Fortunately, he was fully healed before she demanded to see his wound, so all she saw was some soot from Naruto's ruined shirt, not the third-degree burn it had begun as. The wound's pain was nothing compared to the realization that he had scared her, and Naruto promised to be more cautious in the future. Naruto accepted it, but made him promise not to do anything stupid again. He couldn't keep the promise. He told her that if it came down to protecting his precious people or getting hurt, possibly being killed, he would always choose his precious people over his own safety. That triggered another crying fit, but in the end, Naruto accepted that the man she loved could be stupid like that every now and then. Naruto watched and listened as Tony tried to persuade Pepper to flee with him, leaving everything behind. Tony could tell he was terrified of his impending death, and he knew the man had spoken with his assailant before they left. Tony was shaken by whatever the man had said to him, but he wasn't going to tell anyone. Nonetheless, Naruto knew that Pepper would never agree to let Tony simply give up, and she was right in pointing out that they still had options before they could simply give up. She even suggested that he remove the miniature arc reactor from his chest and use an alternate power source until he found a solution. Tony shot that one down quickly because he didn't want a power cord attached to his chest all the time, limiting his movements and making him a prisoner in his own home. "But isn't it worth it if it keeps you alive long enough to find a solution?" Pepper asked, tears welling up in her eyes as she tried to persuade Tony to see reason. "She's right, Tony," Naruto said, finally deciding to speak up. "You get time you didn't have before." Tony scowled, failing to come up with another solution. "With the amount of power we're talking about, I'd still have to be connected to the arc reactor." "But it wouldn't be in your chest," Naruto pointed out. "Wear it in a backpack with proper shielding, at least until you find a better way." Tony's attention was drawn to the fact that his problem was caused by a shielding issue, so why couldn't he build a shielded enclosure for the arc reactor? As Tony began designing the new shielded enclosure, Naruto could see the gears turning. Sure, He was a genius, but he sometimes overlooked obvious solutions to his problems, instead throwing more technology at it. Tony's eyes were filled with that look as he mentally designed the new system, mumbling about backups and shielding materials. She finally turned to Naruto and said, "Thank you," to which he simply smiled. Naruto leaned back on the couch and fell asleep, his work completed.
That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.